The religious have problems, we already know that. I honestly don't know why they bother to try to defend their beliefs at all, if it's all just faith and fifis talking, but I think they know that they're losing and they have to at least try. Sadly, they fail miserably, and then they have to make excuses for why they do that because they can't accept that they're actually losing. Ignore the evidence, baldly rationalize and lie a lot, and we're going to see one of the biggest liars out there in Christianity today. So, stick around. So, I was kind of talking to Allison over on the blog, and we agreed that I'm never going to find a decent apologist, a theologian, a believer of any kind that is ever going to have more than, but I really just want it to be true. I'm never going to find one of those people because those people simply don't exist. I'm just going to keep looking since I don't like to give up, and I don't want anyone to have any cause to accuse me of not being serious about trying to find one. I am. I just don't hold out much hope that they're actually there. Therefore, I decided to look at some older apologists that we've largely given up on to see what they're doing. And this time it's Greg Koukl at Stands Against Reason in a podcast. If Christianity is true, why is it so hard to defend? Well, it's pretty obvious if you think about it. Your first premise is simply false. But Greg has some stuff to say on that, so let's get into it.
Now, the first one comes from Shane, and I'm going to follow it by another one from Deb because they are very similar. So Shane asks, is apologetics not the opposite of what one would find in the one truth? This is a lot of work.
And that's kind of the problem, isn't it? Because if it was actually true, then it shouldn't be so hard, at least in the broad strokes. You should be able to point us to the evidence that you say exists to prove that your religion is true. At least for the basic claims of Christianity, that's really all it should take. Instead, you have to rationalize your way around the facts, making empty claims and appealing to blind faith because you really want it to be true. If I claim that a rock exists, I just have to go and pick up the rock. Here it is. Here's the evidence that you need to demonstrate that the rock is real. If you want to prove a God is real, you should be able to do the same thing in general terms. There it is. Go look at it. This is how I came to the conclusion, rationally, that it really exists. Now, it may not be that easy, granted, but there still ought to be some way that you can show how you came to that conclusion. If I want to show you an atom, I can take you to an electron microscope. Where is your God microscope? Where is anything that you can point at that we can just examine your claims without having to believe in them first? The hard work is in the bullshit. It's not in the evidence since you have none.
And then Deb asks, great website, but is it true? If it was, would you have this website?
I'm not really sure that's a good question, but sure, we'll go with it. Again, we're back to why can't you do the simple stuff for the basic claims instead of having to run around with the goalposts all the time? For some of the more complex stuff, maybe, but for the stuff that ought to convince people on a surface level, why not? There's a God. Ought to be relatively easy. Maybe it's a little harder to prove that Jesus rose from the dead, but you ought to be able to show that Jesus existed at all, right? Then getting into some of the theological weeds, yeah, that might take more work. But where's the stuff that gets you to the basic points? Why does it take so much work to get you there? Establish that you have the slightest clue first in a way that doesn't require faith and fee-fees. After that, if you've done a good job, then we can talk about the rest.
Well, let me respond to Shane first. because could you just read it one more
Sure.
time?
Let me respond to this guy. Wait, what did he ask? All right, I know I'm being critical. Let's let her repeat the question. But that sounds like he wasn't paying a lot of attention, doesn't it? Maybe he just needs time to formulate a BS answer. I don't know. So let's be patient and let her get through it one more time.
Shane.
Is apologetics not the opposite of what one would find in the one truth? This is a lot of work.
It's really not. The basics about the world are really simple. Here we are, look at stuff, do stuff, experiment, make observations. If you want to know if matter exists, I will throw a rock at your head. Maybe not really hard, since we want to have a conversation, but you can test for the existence of stuff by interacting with the stuff. The very basics are easy, because there it is. Granted, the more complex we get, the more difficult it gets, because it's not really as simple as, well, here's the thing. It all breaks down to, at its very core, there's stuff, let's experiment and see how that stuff interacts. Now, do that with any of your claims. Where is the basic building blocks of Christianity that anyone can interact with and test for themselves? Science is based on observation. Religion is not. In fact, religion is based on trying to explain the things that we can't observe, the things that are not emotionally comforting enough when we actually do observe them. It's not about trying to find answers. It's about trying to find comfort. That's not a worthwhile idea, at least in my opinion.
Okay. Why is science necessary to find the one truth about the world? Because it's a lot of work.
It was a lot of work for you to just get there. Now, I'm not saying you can't work toward a complex goal, but if everything is complex, then how do you show that you have any truths to begin with? Greg wants to claim that Christianity is true, but he can't actually back any of it up in any demonstrable way. The simplest truths should be the most trivial to demonstrate, but he has nothing that he can demonstrate at all. All he's really got is, but my book says a thing, and then he just asserts that his book is true because he really wants it to be, but how do you demonstrate that? Then we just get down to hearing voices in his head and how he feels, and it just spirals down into oblivion from there. Where is the simple stuff? Where's the stuff that anyone can examine? Come back when you've got that stuff, Greg, because your desperation to get around having those simple, demonstrable, verifiable answers for anything, that's only hurting you and making you look dumb.
So there's a parallel to me. I'm not sure why it seems that why it's somehow a I'm trying to think of the best way to characterize this. Why it would seem a mark against an effort to find the truth that it's a lot of work.
I'm not sure if he's just BSing or if he's just being completely incoherent. Both are pretty common with Greg Koukl. Are we supposed to think that he came to the table without any thought about the question? Now, maybe that's just how this podcast works. I don't know. This is just another instance where it starts in the middle of a word or a sentence or whatever, in the middle of a concept, and we don't actually have a clue about the ground rules. But I do think that's kind of silly, don't you? So with that in mind, that maybe there's something here that we're just not understanding, and that's a fair point. I'm not going to say we understand what's going on. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. We return to my questions. I'm not saying that some difficulty isn't expected as you get into the more complex parts of your theology. I'm asking why you have nothing that you can actually demonstrate is true for any of it. And I bet we're not going to get an answer to that, are we?
Because there are a lot of aspects of truth that are important, setting aside religious issues, that are a lot of work. the nature of the task is difficult. What we are looking at here, for example, is do we have reason to believe in God?
Good question. Now, how are you going to present evidence for the existence of your God that is going to convince people who aren't already desperately trying to get there? The problem with religion is that there's no actual reason, only an emotional desire to get to something out there. But that doesn't make it real. It's why we have so many problems with the religious, because they can't show that there's any such thing as a God. Maybe it'll take work to get to your specific God. I'll grant that. But how do you get to any God using evidence of any kind? This is why religion looks like such a scam, right? If you look at scams, they are all ridiculously complex. It's a web of lies aimed at keeping the regular person from ever being able to untangle it all. They've always got an explanation to throw at you, but that explanation is never defensible on its own. It's just something else that you just have to believe. And this is why religion is nothing at all like science, because science, the very basics of science, are eminently simple. There it is. Go look at it for yourself. Whereas religion is never like that. Even there's the Bible. You have to accept on faith that the Bible is worth something. The second that you get to faith, the entire proposition becomes ludicrous. Truth doesn't have to rely on faith. Truth relies on facts. And the religious have no facts, do they? They only have wishful thinking. It's why Greg is just floundering around like an idiot. Because Greg is a con man.
Why would someone think that truth, if it were true, would be so self-evident that it wouldn't require any work?
Because most truths are at least generally self-evident in some way. You get to complexity, sure, but the simple bits are very easy to see. Why is Greg trying so hard to get away from that reality? Because he has no interest in reality at all. He just wants to believe, and he wants people to send him money, which is why he's been running this scam for years. There needs to be an explain it like I'm five moment, and religion doesn't have one. It has, well, it seems to me, and then running off with the goalpost while the scam artists explain what they think is really going on without ever being able to back any of it up. If you want to see what I mean, take two religions, and it doesn't matter which two they are, pick two that you like, or dislike, or whatever, and ask both of them the exact same question. Both will answer that question from their own self-serving perspective. They will tell you what they think is true. Neither one is going to have any evidence whatsoever to back their claims up, but both are going to spin you a fairy tale and insist that it's true because that's what they want to believe is true. But that doesn't make any of it true, does it? And that's what we're supposed to be trying to get to, right? You know, truth? Maybe you should come up with some.
Now, let me qualify that, because actually, I think the vast majority of theists think that it's so obvious it doesn't require much work.
That's the faith part. It's just not impressive. Because here's the difference with science, and remember, he brought it up, not me. But when a scientist says, here's something that is true, they can present evidence for other people who don't already believe it, to go and do their own experiments themselves, such that their findings are independently corroborated in some way. Or not. Remember back to Pons and Fleischmann making claims about cold fusion? They released their experimental data, and scientists all over the world tried to verify their findings. It just turned out that they were wrong. Cold fusion, at least their cold fusion, it didn't work. Back to the drawing board. So how do we take what the religious say and run independent experiments to see if what they are saying is actually true? We can't. We can neither confirm nor deny their claims because their claims are not justifiable. Just because they've conned a bunch of gullible dumbasses into believing it, that doesn't make it true. And I remember way back when there were Cold Fusion fanboys who were just running around making plans for all the stuff we'd be able to do when Cold Fusion just hit the market. It's going to be cheap and it's going to be wonderful. Just because you believe it, that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't make it true, and the truth is all that matters. So this is not remotely impressive. Not one bit.
Look around you. Look at the origin of the universe.
That doesn't tell you anything at all about a God. This is the problem. This is what they always get wrong. I don't get it doesn't mean God done it. You have to come up with a way to bridge that gap. You need evidence to show that a God actually exists and demonstrably did anything. You can't just assert it, which is all the religious are doing. You have to be able to demonstrate it. They just really want to believe. This is why it seems to me is so meaningless. So what? How it seems to you doesn't prove what's actually going on. It only panders to your own childish emotional state, not to reality, which is all that really matters. It's why these people wind up looking so stupid. Because they are.
Look at all the order and the design and the teleology. Things seem to be made for purposes that even, like the atheist Richard Dawkins claims.
How it seems to you doesn't matter at all. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that you're right. We can give all of that to him just for funsies. It doesn't mean that a God is responsible. It doesn't mean that his God is responsible. Just because he really wants it to be true, that doesn't make it true. I spend a lot of time trying to explain this to the religious and sadly to other people, and they can't get any of this through their heads because they don't care. Their God is the answer that they want to reach. Therefore, that's the answer they're going to insist is real because they just want it to be real. It's why faith is so utterly worthless, because it's not a search for truth, it's a search for comfort. They just really want to believe. It doesn't matter how much you try to show the religious the rational error of their ways. They don't give a damn. They just want it to be true, whether it is or not. And that's not going to get them anywhere worthwhile, is it?
The biological world is a complex world which seems to be designed for a purpose, or appears to be designed for a purpose.
I don't give a damn what Dawkins says. That said, though, I don't recall a place where Dawkins ever said what Greg is claiming that he said. I could be wrong because, as I said, I don't really care about Dawkins or anybody else. But generally speaking, Dawkins has maintained over the years that nothing in nature has an intelligent purpose, period. I wouldn't put it past Greg to just lie about it or to misquote Dawkins, but if anybody knows of any specific quotes that we can look at, something that you can link directly to, that would be great. I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying it's false. I'm just saying I am not aware. There is a difference between saying it looks like it might be interpreted as having a purpose and, well, this has a purpose. And I don't trust Greg farther than I can throw him to know the difference between the two. This is a point that I've made many times before too. There's a difference between the interpretation of purpose and actual purpose. It comes down to, well, it just seems to me, and as we all know, that means nothing. This is another reason we have to take the individual out of it, because it's those personal interpretations that get in the way of actually understanding reality. I'm only concerned about what is really going on. I don't give a damn how Greg feels about it.
He'll even acknowledge that. So in the question of God, I don't think is that hard.
I'd like to see where he acknowledges that, since I've never seen it, although I don't really care. I don't keep up on Dawkins. I don't really care what he says, whatever. But you're still just sprinting towards your emotional goal without paying any attention whatsoever to actual evidence. Even if there was a demonstrable purpose to anything, and there isn't, but even if there was, that doesn't mean God done it. You've got a lot of steps in the middle to fill in and a lot of evidence to present, and the religious have absolutely no means whatsoever to do so. Because this is the difference between science and religion, as we were talking about before. Science actually has to fill in those steps. It actually has to provide that evidence. Religion just pretends like they don't exist. Well, of course my God is real. It just becomes the automatic answer to anything they don't understand or don't like, and that's not how rational inquiry works. You actually have to be able to prove it. Your faith means absolutely nothing. But the religious can't get that through their heads, can they?
Well, then why are you apologists working so hard at it? Because atheists deny what seems to be obvious and raise a lot of kinds of challenges and everything that then require an answer.
Obvious to you, because it's certainly not obvious to us, because we aren't starting with the unjustified assumption that God exists. You are. You are not trying to establish any of this as factually correct, as evidentially supported. It just makes you feel good, and you don't actually care about the truth. You just really want it to be true, so you just declare it true and think, well, that proves it's true. Job done. But that doesn't impress anybody else, though, which is why you need to take a massive step backwards and realize that God done it is not the foregone conclusion that you desperately wish that it was. You need to walk us through those steps. And you can't, because you've never been through those steps on your own. You just leapt to the conclusion because you desperately wanted it to be true. But that's not good enough.
I don't think the conclusion that God exists is a hard one to come to.
Not if you're being irrational, which the religious are. If you got a dozen theists together of varying faiths, they would all come to their own different conclusions. The Muslim would say Allah did it, the Christian would say God did it, and the Hindu would pick one of their gods. We're asking how any of you actually got there, and none of them will have any convincing answers. It's faith and fifis all the way down. We are looking for facts and evidence, and they don't have any. Just assigning an answer because that answer makes you feel good, that doesn't make that answer true. We are looking for true, not comfort. It's no wonder Greg is so clueless, because he doesn't have a brain in his head. He's just been programmed to say, God done it, to any question he has, because Greg is a moron.
This is why atheism is extremely rare in the world.
Not so much. Because if you look at Europe, a lot of countries there are majority atheist. Atheism is the fastest growing quasi-religious demographic out there. It's only been rare because assholes like Greg have just murdered atheists and worked to destroy their lives for centuries. Now that they can't shut us up, we're winning and the religious are losing. In the past decade or so, at least according to Pew, Christianity has dropped from 77% of Americans down to 65%. And that was a study from 2019. And at the same time, the religiously unaffiliated, i.e. atheists, rose from 17% to 26%. A quarter of the American population is not rare. Greg is an idiot. By 2070, if things continue as they are, again according to Pew, Christians will be down to about 35% of the population, and atheists will be in the clear majority. And honestly, I don't think it's going to take that long. I might even see it in my lifetime. And I think that would be great.
And it's not, I think, a matter of massive indoctrination. We have all kinds of different variations of religious views, but virtually all of them entail the belief in an extra material realm, and many of them entail a belief that someone is in charge.
Beliefs don't make facts. This honestly shouldn't be that hard to understand, but for people like Greg, clearly it is. If there was one thing that I see consistently among the religious, it's the inability to understand that just because they really want it to be true, that doesn't mean that it is. For the majority of theists who show up in the channel, they will make claims of, well, of course my beliefs are true. Really? Prove it. Produce your evidence that shows that your beliefs are actually true. Go ahead. But of course my beliefs are true. They just can't get beyond that claim. In fact, a lot of them get really mad about being asked for independent evidence, like we're calling them a liar or something for expecting more than just their say-so. They are emotionally attached to their beliefs, but their emotional attachment doesn't make their claims true. They just don't care.
Of both material and extra-material realm. This is so completely obvious to everybody that they think it's foolish to deny it.
Obviously, it isn't obvious to everyone, or we wouldn't be asking you to defend yourself. Of course, people like Greg can't understand that everybody isn't just like he is. In fact, I see a lot of theists getting really mad at the mere suggestion that they don't hold the only acceptable position on everything, anywhere. Increasingly, though, more and more people are rejecting the claims of religion, which is why religion is dying. Greg can't accept that, but it is undeniably true. Again, these people don't want to talk to us, so they can continue to lie to themselves about the state of actual reality. How pathetic is that?
Now, that doesn't mean that the atheists are wrong and all religious people are right in some measure. It just means that that doesn't seem hard to most people to believe in an extra-material realm and a God who runs it.
Your opinions don't matter. There was a point where it wasn't hard for most people to imagine that the earth was flat. They were just all wrong. There was a time when it was obvious to most people that the sun went around the earth. They were wrong too. There was a time when the majority thought that the earth was the center of the universe. Now, we know just how insignificant it is in the grand scheme of things. People are wrong all the time. That's why we don't care what's obvious to anyone. We care what is demonstrably and defensibly true. And Greg doesn't give a damn, because Greg is an idiot.
That seems to be easy. And there are reasons for that are obvious and at hand. The origin of the universe. Big Bang needs a Big Banger. That doesn't take a master's degree in anything. Doesn't even take a bachelor's degree. It's common sense.
And common sense means nothing. This is exactly why we're not impressed with the religious. They are anti-intellectual. They are anti-evidence. It doesn't matter what seems to me. It matters what is actually true. Your feelings and your desires and your common sense are worthless if they do not accurately describe the demonstrable state of the reality that we all share. And they don't. This is why Greg is such a laughingstock, because he's not at all concerned with the facts. He's just looking for emotional comfort, and that is positively childish. This entire podcast thing is just laughable, and we're only about halfway through it, because Greg doesn't have the slightest grasp on reality. So let's get a little bit farther before we give up for the week, because I'm starting to remember why I don't bother with morons like Greg Koukl very often. Sadly, there really isn't anyone better, is there?
Now, that may not be true, but it is a common sense notion. A design needs a designer, okay? Moral law needs a moral lawgiver, okay? Well, these are pretty straightforward notions.
Except you've just spun every single one of them specifically so that you can apply your emotionally comforting wishes and dreams onto them because that's what you want to be true. There is no demonstrable design. You just desperately want there to be a designer, so you are choosing to interpret things as designed just so you can get there. We know how morals actually work. But you're not happy with that. You really want an invisible father figure in the sky to just control everything, so you are choosing to interpret morality as you do, whether it's defensible or not. They are starting with the conclusion that they really, really like for emotional reasons, and then just backtracking to try to get somewhere emotionally comforting because that was their goal the whole time. This is not a search for truth. This is a search for comfort. A search for truth doesn't care where you end up, as long as you get to the destination of truth. So long as the conclusions reached rise rationally from the evidence and observations along the way. And Greg doesn't want to do any of that. He is not remotely concerned. He's just trying to run home to Papa because that's what makes him feel really good. Well, too bad. What makes you feel good doesn't have anything to do with the truth. But since he and other theists are only concerned with their feelings, they entirely give up the search for truth because the actual truth doesn't stroke their egos. This is a them problem. It always has been and it always will be. Sad, isn't it? So anyway, what do you think so far? Granted, we're probably leaving them in the middle of a thought. That happens sometimes, but that's just going to make the Supercut fans happy somewhere down the road. Has Greg said anything remotely coherent yet? Or is this just, but I really, really want to believe it, writ large? That seems to be pretty much all he's capable of, right? So we'll pick it up right here next time, and hopefully, he won't be quite so ludicrous then, but come on, this is Greg Koukl we're talking about. He's a moron through and through. I don't think he's capable of setting his emotions aside and just thinking. But I guess we'll see. I wouldn't be betting the farm on it or anything, but, hope springs eternal, I guess.